What's going on, guys? I'm Charlie Parsons and this is episode 1 of the Parsons Podcast, exclusive to Boxing Social. Episode 1 features none other than the Don Kalle Sauerland. We talk about his upbringing, always being around boxing, the influence that his father had on him, and also working with his brother now. But away from that, I also wanted to ask him about his old days following England home and away. Enjoy the episode, and if you enjoyed it that much, make sure to like and subscribe to Boxing Social. Delighted to be joined by the Don Kalle Sauerland. This is what I'm calling you now, the Don.
Thank you very much.
How are you, mate?
I don't know how I picked up that name over the years. Was reserved that for Don King. I'm good, mate. You know, starting the year with we had a big announcement, obviously, with Misfits and 5-year deal with the Zone, and this week all the Misfits madness, KSI, and all the craziness. Expect the unexpected. And then off next week after Wembley off to Manchester with Eubank-Smith on Sky Box Office. So, you know, the year starts at an interesting pace.
Look, Kalle, we want to get into your life, but just quickly, you have just signed off that 5-year deal with the Zone. Big for you guys. Obviously, we saw Misfits introduced. Not everyone was sure what to expect, but the guys, Joe Markowski, everyone at the Zone, clearly very happy. And I know yourself and Mams worked hard to make this as big as it is now.
Yeah, I think it just all has happened sort of naturally and organically. It looks like the nut house from the outside, and sometimes it is on the inside as well. But you know, me and Mams have spoken about this since 2018-19. He obviously comes from the music space, rappers. I think he's worked with Lady Gaga, you name it. He's worked with them, and so he comes from a very different but similar environment to the boxing industry. You know, but it was always, you know, he was on his fast lane, I was on my fast lane, and we were talking, and then last year we said, come on, let's just sit down, the three of us, and JJ and him came into the office. So, you know, but when you hear KSI speak about boxing face to face and his take on it, I was very anti the sort of, you know, the especially, you know, Jake Paul at the time calling out, I can't remember if it was Canelo or Mayweather, was a few famous clips of me on that one. And people said, oh, you changed. And I was, well, I didn't really change. I listened to JJ's philosophy on it, and he takes it super seriously, especially for a guy who's got so much going on in his life. He trains like a pro. He travels with them. He is always even on the road with his team. You know, even when you work with pros and you go off and do a media tour, they normally leave the trainers at home and look forward to a couple of days, maybe a bit of road work. But you know, he goes off and does gym work when he does his promo stuff with
Dedicated
Prime or whatever other business he's doing, or when he goes on tours. And it was, you know, he's also. You know, recently there was someone who put out Buturbiev, and he said, I can't remember, he put something very funny out, forget it, not a chance. Yeah. So he's got a very realistic take on it, and but he also has that vision of the longevity of what we're trying to do with Misfits, and you know, and so I mean, it's that meeting changed sort of everything, and it suddenly became serious. We did some clip. I remember, I think he did his in London. I was somewhere in the world, and Mams was in LA at the time, and we put these 3 sort of literally iPhone selfie videos together, pieced it together as a clip. You know, KSI did his magic with it, and the world suddenly started talking about this Misfits. What is this? You know, and then we ended up doing our first show, obviously at the O2 with the Zone end of last summer. And haven't looked back since, you know, and here we are on MFX Series 005, and 6 and 7 are following very quickly, and there'll be many more to come.
Look, Kalle, away from that, we look back at the roots where everything came from. If I said to you to pinpoint a childhood memory that has that sticks out in mind, that made you who you are today, or sort of changed the way you think about things back from the roots, is there anything that
in terms of fighting, in terms of boxing?
Well, in terms of what's led you to have the career that you've had.
Okay, in terms of career, I didn't really have a choice, I'd say. I was born into a boxing family. The old man, obviously, in the Hall of Fame. My babysitters were boxers. I got spoon-fed it from an early age. Lived in just outside London, and actually the house had a big multi-car garage, and that was converted into a gym where fighters were sparring. So I was probably playing around with my toys around the ring while they were sparring, and it was bizarre, but it was fun, And the school trips would be based on, or school holidays would be based on, where the boxers were that my dad was looking after at the moment. And I think sort of later on I got a bit fed up with it, went on to following football more, and sort of rebelled. Obviously still couldn't get away from boxing. But then I think it was the era of the Eubanks, the Benns, the Collins, and living in the UK, you couldn't really miss it, and that was the Saturday night. That was the ones who really brought me back into as a fan, first and foremost, into boxing. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned following England, and that's something I want to speak about towards the end of the podcast. Yeah. I'm sure there's some stories there.
Yeah, Tottenham and England.
You mentioned your father there. I imagine probably one of the most influential figures in your life. What was that relationship like growing up? Because we look at some promoters and they barely ever saw their father, but I know that you were always travelling about and stuff. How was that? How was he as a figure in your childhood?
I was a very strong figure, like my mother as well. They're both very strong characters, very headstrong. But my parents split up when I was pretty young, and my dad, who was famous for his work in boxing, but was doing a lot of work in Africa as well. But every second weekend we had together, and despite him living in Africa, more or less, he would make his way to London, not exactly round the corner, never missed a weekend. So he taught me very early the principles of being a father. I'm a proud father myself now, and I always try and remember every second I get, like, in between this mad world, is I'll always first priority is to see the kids, and so I think what he instilled in me was, it wasn't one of these disciplined fathers. He was a good time guy, and I wouldn't say a wild character. We're married 5 times, but he's got this air of calmness. Anyone who sits with him, he's very calm. You will struggle to find a person who'll say a bad word about him in boxing, something that I guess I look at that. I'm sure there's a few more people these days with the age of social media would have a word or two to say about me, but it's just what it is.
Because of that, is it someone that you would, I suppose it's easy to say the most influential figure in your life because it is your father, but because of what you've gone on to succeed in boxing and achieve everything promotionally, would you say that he is the most influential, or was the most influential person in your rise to success?
I think family is. I've got also my brother in many ways. Later on in life, not after years when we were being big brother, little brother, and having lots of fights. But after that, he became also someone that I always, 100% can trust and look on, and my mother, who's always has been and always will be there for me. So it's for me. I'm very family orientated. That's pretty much the way I see things.
If you were to go back to your 18-year-old self, and I don't know whether this would be when you were going through that sort of phase of rebelling a little bit, but is there something that you would maybe say to yourself back then if you were given the opportunity?
I was a bit later than that. I was a pretty good student. Till I was about 18, 19, but when you grow up in London, there's always the sins distractions of London's, but what would I go back and say? No. I've enjoyed every minute of whatever I've ever partaken in.
There's been ups and downs in everyone's life, and we see highs and lows within the hour in boxing at the way paces move. You came in here and everything's always manic for you. You're on your phone, one message 1 second, another message another. But for you so far in the boxing journey, what's been the biggest challenge that you've had to face or sort of overcome adversity-wise?
Good question. To pin it down on one, it'd be impossible. You always look, I guess, at recent memories, but I think, you know, if I look back at some of the really big fights we put on, how tough they are to make sometimes, you know. From a UK perspective, I think if you look going back over 10 years now, Klitschko Hay, you know, I think there was about 5 promoters involved, and it was carnage, and, you know, people asked to leave the room because the one promoter wouldn't speak to the other promoter while he was there, so the TV companies had to do the meeting twice because the promoters refused to be in the same room together. You know, we make out so much that being a boxing promoter is very difficult, and it's got to make this fight, and it's so complicated. It's not really that complicated. We pat ourselves on the back far too much. But at the same time, what I say was the biggest challenge was definitely putting together some of the tournaments I've done. You know, when you look at the World Boxing Super Series, which I still think we're going to get a lot of joy out of in the future. That was a bit of a pill to swallow when COVID hit. Like, you know, we could put on events and things like that pretty quickly afterwards, but managed to do the final of the second season. But really, that totally put a stop on that for the moment in terms of doing it worldwide, and that's trying to reignite that as well, which is on a good path back. But you know, that obviously took a massive hit at the time. So that was a weird phase. You can look back in more recent memories, of course. You know, we can't talk around last year. You know, we had a very public, you know, low point was, you know, the whole Conor Benn drug scandal, doping scandal. That was a tough time. That was a tough time, but you get through it by just, you've got to crack on. And I remember on that Thursday night, getting back home and door closes and missus and kids in bed, and I just sat there and I'm like, what the fuck happened there, pal? Because I was on absolute overdrive to get it done. I spoke to Junior, wanted it done, and in the end, the handling of it, everything around it was, and it will all come out. It was disgraceful, and you know, when I sat down and just sat there, have I done something wrong? And you start questioning yourself, and I'm like, no, hold on. We've done everything by the book, done everything, done every check, done everything by the book on what we've been told and what we had at the time. So we were sitting there, and but when that door closed, I remember sitting down in my living room and just thinking, what the fuck happened there, pal? You know, that was a moment. I think, because it's still very fresh and recent, and I'm reminded in every interview when I'm asked, like, what's happening now? It was out of our hands' control. We didn't know, but we were in a situation which was so weird and bizarre, and it felt like we were involved in some sort of cover up, but we weren't. We were following everything by the book of the rules, and that was also a moment when I said something has to change in the sport. I mean, it can't be. This can't be. You know. And you know, and it was literally like, you know, friends who'd booked tickets and flown in, and you know, I call them up and say,
almost like the responsibility of having to go.
I would have to call up pals and say, sorry, mate, you know, I've known a couple of weeks, but because of the way the laws are in boxing, I couldn't tell you. These are private friends. These aren't even,
people involved.
So I'm not saying that they should be treated differently.
People away from boxing,
from a private
people that you trust
like,
on a one-on-one.
Yeah, like even I had cousins who were coming down from up north. It's insane. It was insane, and I felt really shitty. For no reason that I should have felt shitty for at that time, but
when it's out of your hands, you have no choice.
First of all, it wasn't. We were the aggrieved party. I'm not saying that in the future there might be someone on our side who's failed a drug test. It's fortunately part of professional sport that these things happen, but the way it was handled
is where,
which was very much out of our hands. Well, we were told to speak to lawyers, and even like Chris as an athlete was never granted a proper explanation. And so that. But there's not a podcast about that. It was, but that moment was obviously when you're then suddenly alone reflecting. It's a pretty dark place.
We spoke about it when we did the end of 2022 review, and I said sometimes you have to sit through the highs and you have to sit through the lows. One of them you mentioned was when Myris Breedis lost out in all the way across the world, and then you've got a flight back and you've got no time to really get your thoughts together. Like you say, you pinpointed there, you sort of shut the door and you got back and your kids and your wife's upstairs asleep. How do you deal with those thoughts? Because we're all human, we all get down, and there are always setbacks for all of us in life. But for you yourself, there is an element of, in boxing, it's a bit of a circus. It never ends, and you don't have much time to be able to be in that mindset. How do you push yourself to? Well,
it's normally there's a therapy in boxing, and that's called. There's always another shitstorm coming.
Yeah.
And actually, I went straight from there into a Misfits fight week up in Sheffield, so, which was
polar opposite.
It was the best therapy for me though, because I went up there and there was suddenly people shooting water pistols at each other, kicking off, and then the whole stage went up in the air. You couldn't make it up. So it was like, that really helped me that week. And then I think I went on from there. We promoted the week after in Frankfurt. And then we had a Channel 5 show. Then we went off to that was up north, and then we went off to Austin for another Misfits show. And then we had a big end to the end of the year. So
the hecticness of
you get back into it. The lovely thing about UK boxing though is we see each other very often, and unfortunately I couldn't quite sort of say, well, we'll leave that, let them get on with their thing, we'll sort our thing out in terms of the Eubank-Benn stuff. But obviously we did in the end move on, and good luck to them in solving their situation.
Kalle, let me ask you, if you could change one thing about boxing, and I suppose what you maybe touched on there, one thing I've just said, the transparency around handling of situations, also mandatory situations where fighters are made to fight final eliminators and then sort of sitting there for years on end. Either they're final eliminators, we sell them as final eliminators to the public, to the media, to fans, to the fighters first and foremost. You're boxing a final eliminator. Okay, well, let's have a transparency around that, what that actually means. We know which situation I'm talking about at the moment with Filip Hrgovic, but in general, that's a situation that isn't good for the sport, because you take away the credibility of, hey, I'm announcing a fight, it's a final eliminator. And by the way, I remember doing final eliminators 15, 20 years ago, and they were pretty, you do a final eliminator, you knew you might squeeze one in, the champ, but he's got to fight you after that. That was the way it worked. And now it's sort of like, well, there's final eliminators being fought, but they're not the final eliminator.
But they're doing like another final eliminator before the mandatory's even being fought. So how's that? I mean, was there like a queue? It doesn't work that way, does it?
Is that on the sanctioning bodies to?
I think it's
some clarity.
I think the problem, and it's, I guess it's a similar thing when we talk about the handling of the Conor Benn situation. Is you need, and this is a big ask. But I remember Mauricio Sulaiman. He wanted to put something together like this, and I think it's down to the four heads of the alphabets to get together, invite the major promoters. There's only, 10, 11 out there in the world, not much more, who are promoting regularly with their world champions, and get everyone in a room and invite all promoters into it. But you've got to have like an annual general meeting where you sit down and discuss
and outline. And
I would invite the cameras into that. I would make that quite a public process, because
so that there's no room
there's no
situation like now.
Well, exactly. But someone then has to be a decision made. To try and do that's very difficult. A lot of people thought we were trying to do that think we're trying to do that with the World Boxing Series. It was never about that. It was about putting the best against the best together. Yeah. So it's how you get there. It's a tough one. Let's not forget, boxing most of the time works very, very nicely for everyone involved. From social media channels to broadcasters to promoters to, most importantly, the boxers. The fan base isn't shrinking, despite everyone every year since I've been involved in boxing saying boxing's dead and boxing's this and boxing's that. Boxing ain't dead. Come on, do me a favour.
Away from the negatives then, if you could relive, and it'll probably be very hard to pick one, but you personally, if you could relive one moment where you sat there and you thought, you know what, this is special, and like you said to me before, you don't really get the opportunity to enjoy them for as much as you can, because the circus at boxing will always continue and there'll be something the next day. But when you sit there and you think, you know what, we pulled that off, I was part of that, I was able to witness that. Is there one that sticks out?
I mean, I've got to say, without crowing now and trying to make myself bigger than other promoters, is I'm the only promoter, and I'll include my dad in this to make it fair, who's promoted big fights in so many different countries. And I'm not talking about with one network like Eddie's doing it. I'm talking about like Finland, Robert Helenius, Denmark, Mikkel Kessler, Germany, I don't know how many different world champions. Latvia, Myris Bridis, Russia, Nikolai Valuev, Alexander Povetkin, the UK, David Hay, George Groves, Chris Eubank, the list goes. So I can do that in a hell of a lot of different countries. So what I find amazing is to look at the different atmospheres in those countries promoting them, because ultimately I'm not a fighter, so I don't have that buzz that they get, which must be the best buzz I think on planet Earth. But as a promoter, I think Denmark was very, very special with Mikkel. When Mikkel fought in Parken and in Herning, that first fight with Carl Froch. I mean, me and Carl hated each other at the time, and now we get on very well.
That's boxing.
It's boxing, but I've never fought him, thank God. I wouldn't be sitting here today. But he actually did come out once with a comment saying, if I see Kalle Sauerland down a dark alley, I'll never forget it. Oh, he had a couple of crackers for me. I had a few good ones back, but that night will stick with me forever. It was
special.
It was like in a very tin arena, 11,000. There must have been 15 in there. It was set up for 11. It was so packed. It stank of beer. They must have drunk. We've done some analysis on it. Normally they say there's about 3.5 pints drunk per boxing fan, and they must have done about 13.5 each. They were, but not a fight in the house,
but just made it
all
the
big
real
Viking
experience.
fellas, and they lifted the roof. It was like it was going to blow off. And even Carl obviously got huge ovation leaving the ring. It was just such a great night. And by the way, Carl, if you're listening, that the second fight was just as good as the first. Credit to you. It takes two to tango, and I was always annoyed that we couldn't do that third fight, because I think they both wanted it. I think
deserved it as well.
Yeah, it was. But it's not going to be happening again. just in case people think I'm trying to talk up a fight here. But
they're not doing it again. Yeah.
And I think the other ones that see, obviously the big heavyweight championship nights, but I think Usyk in Moscow.
Yep.
Dare I say Moscow on a podcast these days? But in the Olympus Sky arena, lifting the World Boxing Super Series, and watching my dream sort of come to fruition, and watching all those 4 belts in the ring, and really that was fantastic. Germany, I don't know, the nights with Arthur Abraham in the Big O2 in Berlin. And the list goes on and on. George Grimes winning his world title in Sheffield. That was a night that felt like it was the best part of the roller coaster of boxing. George's career, actually. If you want to talk about roller coasters and boxing and how boxing works, just look at George's career. You know. And
nice that you've still got that relationship with him now. We see you with him.
Yeah, listen. We've been through so many good times together, and so many bad times as well. And then but also with Hay, with David, we've still get on tremendously. There's no fighter that we've worked with who we don't still get on with. No, even Alexander Povetkin, my first boxer I ever signed as a boxer. He calls me every year on his birthday, on my birthday, and he always talks to me in Russian, and I think he don't speak a word of English. I don't speak any Russian either, we got on even though we couldn't really talk.
There was a complete barrier there.
Yeah, maybe that's why we got on.
Look, Kalle, I want to do a little bit at the end, sort of like I said, on England and your life as such, but when the time comes and you decide that boxing's no more the industry for you, to call it a day, how would you like to be remembered? You've spoke about working with different networks, different territories, now working with Misfits and sort of being able to dabble in both. But would you just want to be remembered as someone who tried their best for the sport, someone that delivered the nights for the fans that we wanted, someone that was a pioneer in sort of creating and allowing new markets in boxing?
First of all, I know promoters, we like to talk about ourselves a lot and make ourselves important. I don't really think like that. I think about what I enjoy doing with events and where I get a buzz out of the event. When I know there's an event, and there are some events I can, even I put them on and I just can't quite get up for them. Then I know that went wrong for that reason. I'll always try and do events that I get a buzz out of. But I guess my traits are, I think, more than others. I've always tried to work with other promoters. Yeah. Even sometimes I'm in the weaker position, sometimes I'm in the stronger position, but never overplay your position. Yeah. My dad taught me a very, very important thing early on. And I remember I was getting a little bit carried away. I had a year. I put on. I launched the Super 6, not the Super Series, with Showtime, ARD, Sky Sports. These. What was I at the time? 29. Yeah. Put together this concept, sold it to Showtime. Really pissed off all the American promoters. I remember they weren't fucking happy.
As they are easily pissed off.
Like, why are you pissed off? I mean, you're getting more money and you're getting your fighters out in a tournament. Yeah. And at the same time, we made a new ARD deal with a big German network for 5 years. It was a year where everything I touched, it was like Midas touch. And I'm not going to say I got arrogant and lifted up or whatever, but I was having a fucking touch. And it was like...
Did you need humbling?
Just let me finish the story. So, the old man came up to me and said, listen, son, right, never forget that Sunday always comes. Now, he's not talking about the church, but there's promoters, they get so caught up in their events and their, putting on the biggest events, and they think, oh, fucking won't give him tickets, or, well, accreditation now, we'll just ignore that one, despite them having helped you over the years. He taught me Sunday always comes, and it's quite simple. When you're promoting the biggest event in the world, and there is, by the way, there never will be a biggest event, Rum in the Jungle, maybe, as an iconic event, but never believe that lasts. You're only as good as your next event, not your last event. So never think in that moment when everything's going for you, you jack the land, everyone's dialing, forget it. Because you do that in boxing, you're a goner. You're a goner.
Yeah.
And I took that on board, and I always try to be like that. So I don't like to over-celebrate. I'll over-celebrate a sporting success. So if one of my fighters who I'm very close with, like with Mikkel, man, the nights after when Mikkel won, I tell you, we were on the beer for days. Yeah, it was so fun because, and we're still extremely close today. I had great nights in Russia because I was so passionate about my fighters. I was literally like the worst, and I still am not a great loser, but the worst loser ever. And I wore my heart on my sleeve a little bit too much when I was younger, but that's cool. That's cool. I've calmed down a bit now.
Look, Kalle, I remember I saw you in Newcastle and you were sporting a big green Stone Island puffer jacket, I think it was.
Yeah.
And then the week before that, you spoke to me about following England. And that was something that I was a little bit surprised at because it was around the time of the World Cup. I said, if England go out, will you support Germany? If Germany go out, will you support England? But you said you made the decision when you were young.
It was a rebellious one.
Was it?
It was very young because, look, we've lived here all our lives pretty much. I've obviously worked in Germany a lot. But we grew up following Tottenham. North London boys, and my dad supports Germany. He hasn't lived there in 50 odd years, 55 years now. But yeah, so it was, so we were brought up on English football, and that's it, just because you got a German dad, you don't have to follow his country. But we were in that, and you used to travel with England tournaments. My last proper tournament with England was probably Portugal 2-4, but the funnest one by far was, and how old was I there? 20. I've got to be careful what I say. 23 was obviously the legendary Euro when we beat Germany 1-0 in Charleroi. Was Belgium and Holland. That was a mad few weeks over there. We never wanted to end that tournament. That was good fun, yeah.
Well, I suppose we, from a boxing perspective, only see this side of you, and we're not going to sit here and portray the image that you're this mad lunatic that goes around chinning people in the stands. But what was that like for you? Because we only see you now, and we see you at these events, like, for example, today, you're talking up on the stage with everyone that's important in the event. What's the Kalle following England like?
I was a Fruit Loop. I'm not going to go out and condone football violence or whatever. No, it was more of a lad thing.
Yeah.
I'm going to play that down a little bit. I've got to be careful. Every time I talk about it, I've got people pop up on Twitter and find pictures of me about 20 years ago. 25 years ago now, but no, we used to just follow, passionately. Let's put it like that. And it was a lad culture at the time. Very different to now. It's all changed, and I guess the lads from the 80s will say, well, the 90s lads, they don't have a clue and whatever. And the 70s lads, of course, they were the biggest lads of them all. But no, we used to have a great time. Also Tottenham home and away. Just good fun.
Well, Kalle, thank you for joining us. Just finally, on your brother Nisse, how does, I suppose, away from boxing as well, but also in boxing, how has that relationship matured? You said when you were younger, you got in a lot of fights, but that's brothers, isn't it? That's brothers.
We fought like a pair of Jack Russells.
Yeah.
But we did that at a time when kids fight, so make nothing more of it. The last one we had, I think we both had one too many to drink. That was But it wasn't that long ago. It was about
That's a natural clash,
2005,
right?
2006. We had a in a car park. I think he had me on that one as well. My brother he's not bad.
But nowadays, nice to have him by your side, and I imagine you
my bodyguard.
Yeah, but you're able to go back and forth with each other, and I suppose everything that's pressing to you is pressing to him.
Listen, you know, he's the wind beneath my wings, man. You know, my brother. Simple as that.
Kalle, episode 1, the Don. Thank you very much for
mate.
coming on, guys. Another episode coming shortly to Boxing Social. This was the Parsons Podcast.